Society in Myanmar has all but stopped functioning in any normal way, and there are, as the previous speaker outlined, great fears for the country. Some said that the country is at risk of a civil war. As others pointed out, there has been a civil war in Myanmar for decades, but what they really mean by that is the risk of this breaking out into full-scale urban conflict, causing a destabilised region and indeed a failed state scenario as the worst possible outcome. This is not remote or academic to Australia, not just because of our regional interests, but because we have, of course, in every state and territory in the country, Burmese, Myanmarese, diaspora communities who have family and friends and direct connections back to that country. And of course we've invested a lot in recent years in trying to help the country as it moves on what we saw as a more positive trajectory. The recommendations have been outlined and we do support them. I do just want to turn my remarks, though, to the additional comments in the report, building on what the chair has said. These were comments signed by all Labor members of the committee. And I do commend the chair actually on the honesty of the report, in that the report reflected the evidence we heard, brutally as it was at times. And the overarching message, as you can see in the report, that was heard by the committee was enormous community frustration regarding the government's slow, reactive and inadequate response to the coup and resulting crisis in Myanmar. There's been no sense of urgency at any time from Australia's Minister for Foreign Affairs or the Prime Minister, despite the seriousness of the situation, and the evidence was consistent and strong that the government has at every step been far too slow to act, just reactive. Now, in March, Minister Payne told the Senate that sanctions were being considered. In April, at the first public hearing, DFAT told us that sanctions were being considered. Then at the May public hearing, DFAT advised that after 3 months of inaction, the minister finally decided not to implement sanctions. Well, I commend the committee and the government members for the recommendation that said this needs to be reconsidered. We need to look at this further. The government needs to reconsider the imposition of appropriately targeted sanctions, not just as Labor has already called for against key figures behind the coup in the Tatmadaw, but as the report said, to significant Tatmadaw-linked commercial entities. Really important that other countries have looked at the multi-billion-dollar conglomerates that funnel cash to the regime. Now, at the first public hearing in April, more than 2 months after the coup, it was astounding to hear that the government had had no contact at all with the diaspora communities or the democratically elected representatives of the legislature, the CRPH, or indeed the National Unity Government by that point, and that there was no advice for Myanmarese citizens resident in Australia. It was only after public pressure, public shaming in effect, through the committee's public hearings, that DFAT then turned up at the second public hearing months later and said, they claimed they'd made contact with diaspora communities in the CRPH. Now, diaspora groups have told Labor MPs that they know of no one who's been spoken to by DFAT. No group, no individual. Which does raise questions about how genuine and widespread the government stakeholder engagement effort actually is. It did feel like they'd panicked a bit, been sprung bad, and they were having a crack to cover themselves. It also took months for the Home Affairs Department to provide any advice to Myanmarese citizens regarding visa extensions, yet still there's no firm, reliable commitment that no one will be forced to return to Myanmar and that people who can't safely return will be able to stay and build a life in Australia if they wish. And I welcome the recommendation that we need to look at pathways to permanency, not just temporary protection. So my final comments would be the government's slowness to act sends precisely the wrong message to the brave people of Myanmar, the region and democracies around the world. This slowness to act is just like the government's ongoing failure to introduce legislation to enable Magnitsky-style sanctions, dropped into the black hole that is the Foreign Minister's office. The government has to be proactive, not reactive, proactive in delivering for Australia's interests in the region. And they include substantive support for democratic values, freedoms and human rights. We can't just say these things, we actually have to be on the front foot and do stuff. The government must do more than just react to committee hearings or public pressure. In closing, Australia needs to stand up for our values, human rights and democracy by supporting ASEAN and international efforts, as well as taking our own independent actions where they're warranted. It's important. We stand up for our values, we support multilateralism, we work with the region, but we can also act independently in accordance with our values. These two things are not mutually exclusive, as the minister seems to think. So I also commend the report to the House and hope that the minister takes some regard to it.
The member for Wentworth.